My dad smiled at the dinner table and said, "Well, at least one of these kids is actually smart," then turned and looked directly at my sister's daughter while my own children sat right there, and I have not taken them back to that house since. My daughter stopped reaching for my hand the night I chose my affair partner over her school play. She was 7. She had been practicing the role of the sun in a 15-minute production about the solar system for 6 weeks. She had made me quiz her on her 4 lines every night at bedtime. She had picked out which hair clip she wanted me to put in before we left. And I was in a hotel room 40 minutes away with a man named Brennan, watching my phone light up with my husband's name, and I silenced it, and I went back to what I was doing. I want to start there. Not with how the marriage got hard or how Brennan made me feel or what my father did or did not do to my self-worth across 3 decades. I want to start with my daughter's hand, because that is the true beginning of the ending, and I owe this story that much honesty. Her name is Lily. She was the sun. And I was not there. My husband Garrett and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6, when it started. We had Lily and her younger brother Owen, who was 4 at the time, and a house in a neighborhood we had chosen because of the school district and a life that looked, from any reasonable external vantage point, genuinely good. Garrett was a physical therapist. Steady, patient, the kind of man who explains things without condescension and apologizes when he is wrong without requiring 3 days to get there. He was a reliable father in the way that does not make headlines, present at the ordinary things, bath time and homework, and the long boring stretches of a weekend where nothing happens and a family just exists together. He was not perfect. He was real. And real, at some point around year 7, had started to feel in my mind like a synonym for predictable, which I had let become a synonym for not enough, which is a very comfortable progression of logic when you are looking for permission to do something you already want to do. My father's voice is in that progression. I see it now with a clarity that only arrives after you've paid the full price for the confusion. My father, Douglas, had spent my entire childhood distributing his approval in portions so small and so unpredictable that I had structured my entire psychology around the effort of earning them. Nothing I brought home was quite right. No achievement landed without a qualification. My sister Renee was the effortless favorite in that casual, unacknowledged way that families sometimes have of simply organizing themselves around one child's gravity. Renee was warmer, Douglas always implied without stating. More natural. More like him. I became someone who needed to be chosen. Specifically and repeatedly and with some visible enthusiasm. Garrett's love was real, but it did not perform. He did not choose me loudly. He chose me daily and quietly and with his whole life organized around that choice, and I had so thoroughly learned to read love as spectacle that I kept looking at his quiet choosing and feeling, irrationally, unchosen. Brennan was spectacle. That is the only honest way to describe him. He was a client at the branding firm where I was a creative lead, good-looking in the way that seems almost unfair, the kind of man who makes eye contact like it means something and laughs at your jokes with his whole face and makes you feel, in a very targeted and practiced way, like you are the most interesting person in whatever room he has decided to stand near you in. It started with messages about the project. Moved to messages about other things. Moved to a lunch that ran 2 hours. Moved to a Thursday evening that I covered with a story about a client dinner that Garrett received without question because Garrett trusted me, because I had given him no reason not to, because I was spending his trust like someone who had not yet fully understood what happens when it runs out. By the time Lily's play arrived, I had been lying for 4 months. The lying had developed its own musculature. I was good at it in the way you get good at anything you practice constantly. I had a secondary email. I had a story for every absence. I had Dana, a work friend who half knew and half didn't and had positioned herself carefully on that line, available for cover without having to fully commit to knowing what she was covering. Brennan texted that afternoon that he had the hotel until 10 and did I want to come. And I looked at the calendar notification for Lily's play, 4:30, Lincoln Elementary, and I made a calculation so fast I almost didn't feel myself making it, and I texted back that I was coming. I told Garrett the client's situation had escalated and I couldn't get out of it. He texted back, in the middle of getting both kids ready, their shoes and Lily's hair clip and Owen's jacket, "Okay, she'll be disappointed but we'll video everything, love you." I read that in the hotel parking garage and went inside. Garrett's face when I came home at 10:15 is not something I can fully describe. He was on the couch with the video pulled up on his phone, probably watching it again, and he looked up when I came in with an expression that was not suspicion and not anger. It was something more specific. Tiredness, maybe. The tiredness of a man who had handled everything alone again and had made peace with it and was too worn down to examine why that kept being the pattern. "She did great," he offered, turning the phone toward me. I watched 11 seconds of my daughter in a yellow costume with a cardboard sun around her face delivering her lines to a gymnasium full of parents, and then I said I was exhausted and went upstairs. I stood in Lily's doorway. She was asleep. The hair clip was on her nightstand, still clipped to nothing, and the yellow costume was folded on her desk chair because she had folded it herself, which she had started doing, folding her own things, with the particular self-sufficiency of a child who has begun to understand that some things you have to do yourself. I went to bed. I did not let myself feel it. That was the skill I had developed. A perfect, load-bearing compartmentalization. Over here, Garrett and Lily and Owen in the school play and the hair clip. Over there, Brennan and the hotel and the feeling of being loudly chosen. And a wall between them that I maintained with constant structural attention and told myself was sustainable. The wall came down because of my father. Of course it did. Douglas hosted Sunday dinner every few weeks. It was a family institution, the kind that sounds warm and is actually just an obligation with good food. My sister Renee came with her husband and her daughter, Maisie, who was 9 and academically ahead in the way that Renee made sure everyone in the family knew about with the particular modesty of someone who is not actually being modest at all. This specific Sunday, 6 months into what I was doing, Garrett had taken the kids early because Owen had a thing with the neighbor's kids and Lily wanted to go. I arrived alone and sat through the first hour of dinner managing my phone under the table while Brennan sent messages I was actively composing responses to in my head. My father was at the head of the table. He had that quality he always had at these dinners of performing warmth for the room while distributing it very selectively. He asked about Maisie's school project. He laughed at something Renee's husband said. He looked at me twice in the first hour, briefly, the way you look at furniture. Then Garrett arrived with the kids. Owen went immediately to the floor with a toy. Lily sat next to me and leaned into my side, and I put my arm around her and looked at my phone screen under the table and read what Brennan had written and felt that awful electric current that had become more important to me than the child leaning against my ribs. My father watched this from the head of the table. He let a pause settle over the room. Then, smiling, pleasant, the voice he used for observations he intended to appear casual, well, at least one of these kids is actually smart. He turned and looked directly at Maisie. Maisie, sitting across the table. Not Lily. Not Owen. Lily felt it. I know she felt it because I felt her go slightly still against my side, the way a child's body processes something before their mind has words for it. Owen was on the floor and did not register it. Renee received it with the small, private satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for an ally. Garrett, across the table, looked at Douglas with an expression that was very quiet and very clear. My father picked up his fork. I said nothing. I want to stay with that. I said nothing. I had my arm around my daughter while my father dismissed her at his own dinner table, and I said nothing because I was in the middle of composing a text to a man in a hotel across town, and the part of me that should have stood up was somewhere else entirely. Garrett set his napkin on the table. He looked at me for a moment, a specific look I did not fully read until much later, and then he looked at Lily. He reached across the table and touched her hand. You want to get some air, Lil? He asked, quiet, just for her. Lily nodded once. They got up. Garrett collected Owen from the floor. The three of them walked outside. I stayed at the table. I finished dinner with my father and my sister, and I sent the text I had been composing and told myself I would talk to Lily about it later and talk to my father about it later and do the right thing later. Later arrived 11 days after that dinner in the form of Garrett sitting in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with my phone on the table between us. He had not gone through it looking for something. He told me this, and I believe him because it is consistent with who he is. He had picked it up to check a calendar notification, and the screen had been open to a conversation I had not closed, and he had seen enough in 2 seconds to understand the shape of the thing entirely. He was at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. The coffee was made. 2 mugs, both full, neither touched. He had made coffee for both of us out of a habit so ingrained he had done it even now, this morning, and looking at that untouched mug was the first moment the full weight of what I had been doing arrived in my body as something physical. He looked at me. His face was the face of someone who has been awake for several hours with a specific and unwanted knowledge and has passed through the first several stages of something and arrived at a place that was not rage and not tears and not anything I could negotiate with. How long? He asked. 7 months. He nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked at the table surface for a moment and then back at me. Lily's play. Not a question. A placement. He was placing the pieces in the correct order, and that specific piece needed to be placed out loud. I did not answer. The answer was in my face. He stood up. He took his mug to the counter. He poured it down the sink. He rinsed it. He placed it in the drying rack with a care that was almost unbearable to witness, the ordinary gesture of a man maintaining ordinary dignity at the moment when nothing was ordinary. I need to take the kids to my mom's for a few days, he stated, his back still to me, hands on the counter edge. I need you to be okay with that. Garrett. He turned around. The expression on his face was not anger. It was the specific and terrible look of someone who has just seen something clearly that they had been half seeing for a while and is now deciding, in real time, what a person does with clear vision. I need you to be okay with that, he repeated. I was okay with it. I had no standing to be anything else. He went upstairs. I heard him moving through the house. The specific sounds of a father packing for his children, Lily's things, Owen's things, the small negotiations of 2 overnight bags assembled while 2 kids were still asleep. I heard Lily's voice, groggy, asking a question. I heard Garrett's voice, gentle, something about grandma's, something about it being a fun few days. I sat at the kitchen table with my untouched mug of coffee and listened to my family prepare to leave and did not move. The front door. The car. The quiet. I was alone in the house by 8:15 in the morning and the coffee was cold and the drying rack held 1 clean mug and somewhere across town Brennan was probably still asleep, completely unaware that the thing he had never considered a real cost had just been paid by 4 people who had never agreed to pay it. Brennan's response to the collapse arrived in a voicemail I have not deleted and do not listen to. I know what it contains because I heard it once. It was 40 seconds long. It contained the phrase really bad timing for me right now and the phrase I hope you figure things out and nothing else of substance. 40 seconds. 7 months. The arithmetic of that is its own complete lesson. I did not call back. Not because I had arrived at dignity but because the 40 seconds had been so thorough in their smallness that there was genuinely nothing to say to them. You cannot respond to I hope you figure things out in any way that recovers your own self-respect. You can only set the phone down and sit in the particular silence of someone who has just seen, with no remaining ambiguity, exactly what they traded everything for. He did not reach out again. I checked for 10 days and then I stopped checking because the checking was a form of self-punishment I had not consciously signed up for and was not going to keep administering. Garrett moved out on the 1st of the following month. He did not ask me to leave. The house was mine before we were married, the mortgage in my name, and he simply began the process of extracting his life from it with the organized, patient precision of a man who had decided the next thing and was doing it. He took what was his. He did not take things that were disputed. He left the kids' rooms entirely intact, every book and toy and drawing on the wall, and packed only his own things into a truck he drove himself on a Saturday morning when Lily and Owen were at his mother's. I watched from the kitchen window. I did not offer to help. He did not ask. By noon the truck was gone and the house had a specific new quality of space that had nothing to do with furniture. The rooms were the same rooms. The kids' drawings were still on the walls. Owen's plastic toys were still in the basket by the couch. Lily's homework from the previous week was still on the kitchen table, 3 pages of multiplication she had done herself because I had told her I was busy. I sat in the kitchen and looked at the multiplication and felt the shape of what busy had actually meant. The custody arrangement was the part I had not let myself think about in advance because thinking about it required acknowledging consequences I had been running from. Garrett's attorney was measured and fair because Garrett was measured and fair, but measured and fair still produced a document that said my children would spend more nights in a week at their father's apartment than in the house where they were born. It said this because it was the correct arrangement given the specific circumstances, which were that I had demonstrated across 7 months a consistent prioritization of my own wants over my children's basic need for a parent who shows up. I signed it in my attorney's office on a Wednesday afternoon. I came home and made dinner for 2 children who were spending that night with me and I set the table and called them down and Lily came and sat across from me and picked up her fork and we ate and it was fine, we were fine, everything on the surface was fine. Under the surface my daughter was 7 years old and had begun, in the quiet way of children who understand more than they are given credit for, to understand that the architecture of her life had changed and that the change had something to do with her mother. She did not ask me about it directly. She asked sideways, the way children do. One evening, while I was helping her with a reading assignment, she looked up from the page and said, completely without preamble, Dad says we're going to his new place on Friday. That's right. She looked back at the page. Then, is his new place nice? I think so. She turned a page. Then, very quietly, not looking up, did you know he has a reading chair? He got one just for me. She went back to reading. I looked at the top of her head and thought about a man setting up a new apartment and buying a specific chair because his daughter liked to read and making sure she knew it was there and for her, and I understood that Garrett was still, in the middle of everything I had done to him, building things for our children with the same patient hands that had always built things, and that the building had simply moved to a different address. I helped her finish the assignment. I put her to bed. I went downstairs and sat in the kitchen and did not turn on any lights. My father called 3 weeks after the separation became generally known in the family. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it. He wanted to have dinner. He had heard what had happened, he said. His voice had the specific warmth it deployed when he needed something from me, which was different from warmth but wore its clothing well enough to fool a child. I had been that child for 34 years. I called him back. We agreed on a day. I drove to his house and sat at the same table where he had looked past my daughter to compliment my sister's child, and he poured wine and asked how I was holding up, and I looked at him across the table and realized with a completeness I had not previously achieved that I was sitting across from the original architecture of my own damage. Not an excuse. I want to be precise about that. Douglas did not make my choices. But he built the room where my choices were formed, the room where love was conditional and distributed on a curve and you were always, subtly, not quite enough. I had walked out of that room and directly into a marriage with a man who loved me simply and thoroughly, and I had not known how to receive it because nobody had ever taught me that simple and thorough was the good version. I had been trained to perform for a verdict and Garrett had never made me perform and I had confused his constancy for indifference. My father asked if I was going to be okay. He asked it the way he asked most things, with the surface texture of care and the actual weight of someone checking a box. I looked at him across the wine and the table where he had dismissed my children without blinking and I told him I was fine. I have not taken Lily and Owen back to that house since. Not because of what Douglas said, though what Douglas said was its own category of unacceptable. Because I understood, sitting there that evening, that I had been making decisions with the emotional software installed in that house for 34 years and the software was not protecting my children. It was not even protecting me. It was just running, automatic, doing what it was built to do, which was to make me need to be chosen so badly that I would burn down everything stable to feel it for a moment. Lily and Owen will not sit at that table and absorb that software. That is the one clean decision I have made in all of this. Dana removed herself from my life with the thoroughness of someone who had been waiting for a justifiable exit. A long message. Caring in tone, careful in its self-protection. She talked about her own boundaries, her own values, the difficulty of having been put in a position she had not chosen. She was not wrong about any of it. She had been my cover story and she had done it poorly and the guilt of that had been sitting in her chest for months and now she was setting it down along with me. I responded with understanding. I closed the conversation. I have not heard from her since. The friends who had been ours, mine and Garrett's together, sorted themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who have already made a private decision. I was not confronted. I was not argued with. I was simply, gradually, no longer included. A group dinner I heard about afterward. A gathering mentioned in passing by someone who forgot I was no longer on the list. The social infrastructure of a coupled life, it turns out, is largely load-bearing, and when the couple fails, the infrastructure does not redistribute. It simply collapses on the person who caused the failure. I have 2 friends now who knew me before Garrett. 2 people whose relationship with me predates the version of my life I destroyed. They call. They are careful with me in the way people are careful with someone who has demonstrated they are capable of making very large mistakes. I receive the carefulness without complaint because it is accurate. Owen turned 5 in the spring. Garrett organized the birthday. This was practical, the party was on a weekend that fell during his custody days, and he handled it with the focus he brought to everything involving the kids. I was invited because I am their mother and Garrett is not the kind of man who uses his children as instruments of punishment. I came. I stood in the backyard of his apartment building where he had set up a table and balloons and a specific Owen-appropriate chaos of small children, and I watched my son run through it all with his whole body committed to the joy of being 5. Garrett moved through the party the way he moved through everything. Organized, present, stopping to crouch down at a child's level when addressed, making sure the cake was cut in portions that accounted for every dietary thing every parent had mentioned. He had a woman helping him, a friend I did not recognize, who handed him things and laughed at something he murmured and touched his arm briefly in the natural way of someone comfortable near him. I watched that from across the backyard and I turned and watched Owen instead. Owen blew out his candles on the second try and threw his arms up like a champion and everyone cheered and Lily cheered the loudest standing next to her father, and Garrett put his arm around Lily's shoulder and she leaned into him and I looked at the 3 of them in that backyard and understood that I was on the outside of the picture looking in, and that I had built the frame that put me there. I stayed for cake. I helped Owen open 2 gifts. I hugged them both and got in my car and drove home and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. There is a version of this I could tell where the central wound is my father and the way he shaped me and the way that shaping made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of validation Brennan offered. That version is true. It is also incomplete in a way that matters. The complete version is that I am a grown woman who understood, on some level, every step of what I was doing. I silenced Garrett's call from a hotel room during my daughter's school play. I sat at a dinner table and let my father look past my children without saying a word because my hands were busy composing a text to a man who would later leave me a 40-second voicemail. I built a lie that required other people's participation and then let those people absorb the consequences of being near it when it collapsed. I did not do this because of Douglas. Douglas made me hungry for the wrong things. I am the one who ate. Lily asked me once, about 4 months after Garrett moved out, why our family was different now. She sat on the kitchen counter the way she had always done while I made dinner, swinging her feet, and she asked it directly in the way children sometimes cut to the center of a thing when adults have been carefully navigating around it. I turned from the stove and looked at her. She was watching me with Garrett's eyes, patient, waiting, ready to receive whatever I gave her with the seriousness she brought to important things. I told her that I had made some choices that hurt our family. That it was not about her or Owen. That her dad and I both loved her in a way that had not changed and was not going to change. She thought about this for a moment, swinging her feet. Did you say sorry to Dad? Yes. She nodded slowly. Did he say it was okay? Not yet. She looked at her feet. Then, that's fair. 7 years old. That's fair. I turned back to the stove and kept my face pointed away from her until I was sure it was back in the right position. Garrett has not said it is okay. He is not going to say it is okay. That is the correct outcome, and I have made my peace with the correctness of it, if not with the weight of living inside it. We communicate about the children with the functional precision of two people who are doing the most important job they share, and have agreed to do it well. He is unfailingly decent. He does not use the children to say things to me. He does not require me to perform remorse for his benefit. He simply parents, steady and present and organized, and the children move between us, and they are, as best as I can tell, okay. Marked by this. Children always are. But okay. I am working on okay. I see a therapist on Thursdays. I am learning, at 34, what it looks like to receive love that does not perform. To recognize steadiness as the good version. To understand that the hunger my father built in me was his failure and the choices I made from that hunger were mine, and that both of those things can be true and neither one cancels the other out. Lily got a speaking part in the spring production. Larger Than the Sun. She told me about it on the phone, on a Garrett night, calling just to tell me because she wanted me to know. I was there. Front row. I watched her deliver every line with the complete commitment of a child who practices because she loves the thing, not because she needs the approval, which is a quality she got from her father, and I am grateful every single day that she got it from somewhere. She found me in the crowd after and ran over, and I held her, and she smelled like the costume and the gymnasium and herself, and she said into my shoulder, "You came. Not a thank you. Not surprised. Just a fact, placed gently, that said everything it needed to say about the distance between who I had been and who she needed me to become." I held on. I was there this time. I was there. But I already know that this time is not an erasure. It is just this time, sitting inside the permanent record of the time I was not, and Lily will grow up holding both, the sun costume and the empty seat, and so will I, and so will Owen, and so will Garrett in his apartment with the reading chair he bought because his daughter loves to read. You do not get to burn something down and then point to the new growth and call it even. The fire was mine. The ash is permanent. The people standing in it did not choose to be there, and the one who put them there will spend a very long time learning to live with the exact dimensions of what choosing yourself over everyone who needed you actually costs. My daughter ran to me in that gymnasium, and I held her, and she was real and present and mine in that moment, and the moment before that moment, and the moment before that, stretching back to a hotel room and a silenced phone call and a yellow costume folded on a chair by a 7-year-old who had started doing things herself. Those moments are also mine. All of it is mine. That is what nobody tells you when you are chasing the feeling. The bill comes in your children's handwriting, and you will be paying it in the currency of their eyes for the rest of your life.